Ontario's planned sex ed curriculum is contrary to Muslim beliefs. So say many Muslim families who kept their kids out of school this week. Are Islam and the new curriculum truly incompatible? Let's ask Imam Shabbir Ali, president of the Islamic Information and Dawah Center International, and Imam Omar Subedar, founder of the Mathaba Institute. And it's good to have you two gentlemen with us today for a, I would suggest, very timely discussion. We have seen footage, of course, of the protests. And while there are people from various backgrounds who've kept their kids out of school, I think it's fair to say that the majority of the people that we've seen in the footage are from Muslim families, and we wanted to find out why. Let's go over just some of the finer points of the curriculum here, and then we'll discuss. Sheldon, if you'd bring this up. For example, in grade 3, the new curriculum involves describing invisible so-called differences, i.e. gender identity, sexual orientation, that kind of thing. In grade 6, understanding of physical, social, and emotional changes during adolescence. Again, if a teacher is asked, this is apparently not what teachers volunteer, but if they are asked, they are permitted to say, exploring one's body by touching or masturbating is something that many people do and find pleasurable. It is common and is not harmful and is one way of learning about your body. In grade 7, they get into the importance of consent and discussions about delaying or abstaining from any genital contact, including vaginal, oral, or anal intercourse. Okay, let's get into it. Imam Shabbir Ali, how compatible would you say this new curriculum is with the teachings of Islam?
It is important that we put these within the context of the entire curriculum. To begin with, is health and physical education curriculum. It's commonly referred to as sex ed curriculum, but there's no such thing. There's a health and physical education curriculum.
Correct.
And the sex ed portions are only one part of that. And it's one part of one part because the health and physical education curriculum is divided into 3 components: active living, movement, and healthy living. And it's within the third part, that healthy living, that we have again 3 components. And one of the components is sexual development and sexual health.
And that's obviously what we're honing in on today.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Is there incompatibility there?
Well, there are some items which obviously will strike many Muslim ears as being unfamiliar, but that's largely because the Muslim culture has developed in such a way that we don't discuss these things. You mentioned masturbation. Well, there is a variety of responses from Muslim scholars to the question of masturbation. It is not directly mentioned in the Quran, and some see a verse of the Quran that may be interpreted to reach the conclusion that masturbation is not permissible, but others reply in saying that it may just be they're thinking more of male masturbation.
But if I'm hearing you right here, I'm not hearing you say what the Ontario government has proposed and what Islam teaches are utterly incompatible. I'm not hearing you say that. Is that accurate?
Well, to say that they're incompatible would be inaccurate. But of course, there are some items to be discussed, like the question of masturbation, for example.
Okay, we'll get into these in more detail. Let me get your general view on that overarching question. Is there an absolute incompatibility between what Islam teaches and what the Ontario government has proposed?
Well, I'd say it goes 50-50. There are elements there that are compatible versus other elements that are not compatible. You just had named a few, but we do have other issues such as sexual orientation, gender identity, the concept of having 2 moms and 2 dads. These are issues definitely that are going to be very worrisome to the Muslim community. And I think one of the biggest things that people are concerned about is that how this is contributing to what many view as the pornification of society.
The which?
The pornification of society.
What does that mean?
Basically, we're making, when it comes to sex in Islam, it's a very private thing. It's something that, you keep to yourself between you and your spouse. It's not something that is publicized, it's not commercialized, it's not monetized in any shape or form, which is pretty much the culture that we are part of nowadays. And this is look to be something that's just enhancing that culture, which others are finding very troublesome, especially when it comes to the immigrant community, because in the beginning when we had the proposal coming out that there are going to be modifications made to the curriculum, but yet the curriculum was not released as yet, we were going to different mosques, engaging the people, and one of the questions I was asking is how many people think that sex education is a good thing? And when gauging the immigrant community, primarily they felt that it's not a good thing at all. You should not discuss it. And what you find is many don't discuss it. They just don't want it.
The school shouldn't discuss it, or even families themselves should not discuss
The culture is such that it's not publicly discussed, as Imam Shabbir was just
But let me make sure I'm perfectly clear on this. Are you saying that by providing students with information about biology, health, physical education, sexual education, call it what you will, in your view, that is a further contribution to the pornification of society?
Elements, I would say, not
Elements of it.
everything. I think it would be fair that we go through each and every single issue that's in there, which obviously
Well,
time
let's
will
try
not
that.
allow. But if we were to go through that, then maybe we can identify this is probably that's something problematic and this is acceptable.
Let's try some of that. We'll go through some of the items right now. A woman named Farah Marfatia, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, the principal of the Main Gate Islamic Academy, she put together a guide for Muslim parents on how to talk to their kids about sex ed that, in her view, is more compatible than the current Ontario curriculum with Islam. For example, on gender identity, she says, if you are born a boy, your gender identity is male. If you are born a girl, your gender identity is female. You cannot be a boy if you are born a girl, and you cannot be a girl if you are born a boy, because Allah created you perfectly just the way you are. Okay, Shabbir Ali, is that consistent with Islamic teaching in your understanding?
Well, Islamic teaching on the matter of gender identity is rooted within the culture in which the Islamic revelation first appeared. And in those days, the matter of gender identity was not discussed as we discuss it nowadays. Nowadays, we go deeply into the science, we look at psychology, and we notice that sometimes there's a mismatch between the person's psychology and physiognomy. The body appears one way and the person thinks another way. This causes great confusion in some individuals. And if society does not rise to accept these individuals with their thoughts and help them to sort through this confusion and make it possible for them to navigate through society as equally respected human beings, then we would be placing undue burden on such individuals.
So it sounds like you're saying Islam does account for the possibility of transgendered individuals.
I think that this is something that needs to be discussed more by Muslim scholars. I'm saying we need to rise to that, and we haven't risen to it yet. Muslim scholars tend to be conservative. They go back to classical texts and they look at what has already been said, and they tend to repeat that or some variation of that. And sometimes we need to think out of the box. We need to look at new situations that either did not arise previously or arose, but the circumstances were not ripe to deal with it in the most effective manner as we have now.
In your interpretation of Islamic teaching and texts, is there a place for a greater understanding of transgendered individuals?
Well, definitely it needs to be looked into. We can't just shun these people from society. We know it is an issue that does exist in society. And as Imam Shabbir was saying, scholars do tend to gravitate to classical texts. And one of the things that we do find in the classical texts is the issue of hermaphrodites. Like, how do you classify them? And you'll find that they've given guidelines as to how you will classify them as males or females. They're just trying to put them in one or the other category.
But do you sound what Farah Marfatia said here, which is essentially, if you're born a boy, you're a boy. If you're born a girl, you're a girl, and let's stop mixing it all up.
That is the common understanding, that your gender is dictated by your physiology, not by what you think.
So,
personally,
in your understanding of Islam, then there is no mixed up sexual assignment, call it what you will.
You don't find any reference of it in the classical text, but as Imam Shabbir Ali was saying, that we need to rise to the challenge and basically discuss this further and look at all the information that's available in respect to this. But at the moment, I haven't come across any classical text that really addresses this.
Okay, let's follow up with homosexuality, of which there is reference in the new curriculum. And here's the quote on this one. You might notice that there are some families that have 2 moms, lesbians, and 2 dads, gay. They are homosexuals. Homosexuality is not permissible in Islam. It is important to advise your child not to engage in discussions with others regarding families with same-sex parents until they are old enough to understand all the complexities of this topic from a religious and social perspective. Now again, that's what the Main Gate Islamic Academy puts forward in its sex ed curriculum. Is that what Islam teaches?
Well, I think the Quran is very clear on its position regarding homosexual relations. And there's no need for us to go and try and sugarcoat that or and try and change that or modify that. I think living in a cosmopolitan society, it's important that we acknowledge that, yes, there are people that do adopt that lifestyle, they subscribe to that lifestyle, and the last thing that we want to do is basically become offensive and endanger their lives in any shape or form and making people feel uncomfortable. Just realize that, living in Canada, there's all walks of life here, and everyone's got the right to live in peace and harmony.
You know, though, Imam Omar, and I say respectfully, of course, that by calling it a gay lifestyle, that is considered offensive to many people who don't call it a lifestyle, but who simply say, that's who I am, that's how I was born. Do you appreciate that?
Well, I think for me, a person like me, I probably require greater interaction with people from that background in order for me to understand and pass a fair comment. At the moment, I would think it's very premature for me to say anything in respect to that. All I can do is comment from a religious perspective rather from a social one.
Okay, Imam Shabbir Ali, again, this line in here, it's important that you advise your child not to engage in discussions with others regarding families with same-sex parents. Is that consistent with the teachings of Islam?
Yeah, first, Steve, if you don't mind, there's an important clarification.
Sure.
I think that that's to be made. Farma Fratia's document is not the sex ed curriculum for Main Gate Islamic Academy, as far as I understand. The document that you're referring to apparently is this one, How to Talk to Your Muslim Child. And this is actually a guide prepared by her under the guidance of some Muslim scholars and some other people with academic qualifications. It is a guide designed for Muslim parents who are not necessarily connected with Main Gate Islamic Academy on how to talk to their children about the contents of the new health and physical education curriculum. So it's for parents who may have children in the public school, or parents who may have children in Islamic schools, but their children would naturally interact with cousins and others who are going to public school and who will get this information from the new curriculum, and there's a need for parents to discuss this with their children.
On the issue of homosexuality.
Yeah, well, this too needs to be understood a little bit more. Are persons with homosexual orientations born that way, or are people born with the possibility of becoming either homosexual or heterosexual? When I looked at the science on this some time ago, I found the latter, that people are born with the possibility of either or, and most people turn out to be heterosexuals, but some people turn out to be homosexuals. So how much of this is based on the person's choice, how much on physiognomy and the bathing with certain fluids within the uterus and so on. All of this is a matter of science that needs to be explored further. But I agree with Imam Shabbir in that our religion does not teach us to hate people, and there is nothing in the Quran that prescribes the death sentence for homosexuals, in contradistinction to some other scriptures, for example, that say that if a man is found lying with a woman, with another man as with a woman, that the two of them should be put to death. There's nothing like that in the Quran. Those Muslims who feel that a similar penalty should be meted out to homosexuals base that not on the Quran, but on a saying attributed to some classical Muslim scholars, some as early as companions of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. But there is nothing that demands that of Muslims, that this must be the penalty. In fact, if the Quran wanted to say that, there would have been an excellent places for the Quran to mention that. But the Quran actually prohibits sexual impropriety, and much sexual impropriety is committed by people of heterosexual inclination. So the sermons that go down heavy on homosexuals, as if that one problem is the main problem in society, those sermons miss the big picture that most sexual impropriety is committed by people of heterosexual orientation.
Omar Subadar, how much confusion do you think there is in Muslim families in Ontario today for example, when the students go to school and hear what's in the new curriculum, and then come home and maybe have a different message from their parents? Is that problematic?
Well, probably because I can just fall back on my personal experience going through the public system when I was growing up. Um, these are things I, as a student, would never discuss with my parents. And my parents, coming from an immigrant background, don't even know what's going on in the public system because they've never been through it. So the impression that I'm going to get is that this is totally acceptable, whether it's socially, whether it's religiously. I haven't heard anything contrary from my parents or from any other source. So hence, it's just something that I should accept and live by. But then what happens is if I start digging into scripture and I start looking more into the teachings of Islam, then I will find that some things aren't as acceptable as I was taught in my school. And now I'm in this little tug of war in my mind.
Exactly. Is that
Okay?
problematic?
Well, based on my personal experience, yes, it was problematic. I was thinking, well, what do I listen to? What do I accept? What do I embrace? What's more important to me?
Do you have young children?
Yes, I do.
Are they in public school?
Not yet.
They are. Okay. If you had the choice, would you opt them out of this class, as is your right?
Well, based on some of the recent information that's just been released, it's going to be extremely difficult to opt them out of any class because we just don't know at what point it's going to be taught and how it's going to be taught. And based on one letter that just went to the homes of people in the Peel District School Board, it could be taught in any lesson, even in math class, it can be brought up. So if that is the
Wait a
case, then
second. They're not teaching sex ed in math class.
I mean, when it comes to the social acceptance of, say, for example, having two dads and having two moms and so forth, things of this nature, based on the letter that was gone out, it's going to be hard for a parent to actually pinpoint at what point do I want my child out. And I found, I'll be very honest with my personal experience, even if my parents opted me out, it doesn't make much of a difference. I'm going to get that information anyways, from, if not directly, indirectly. So I don't see that to be very effective anyways. It's just a small little bandage to a bigger cut.
A small little bandage to a bigger cut. Do you have parishioners coming up to you and asking your advice on whether or not they should or should not pull their kids out of school because of the new curriculum?
And they haven't actually posed the question in that way, but basically they've thrown up their hands and asked, what are we going to do?
So what is your advice to them?
So far, I have been discussing the matter in sermons and also sending out to parents by email copies of this revised Ontario Health and Physical Education curriculum with advice from some Muslim activists on how to deal with that, how to talk to your children about those things. It's compiled by Anila Jadwanandan with some contributions from Aisha Shirazi and others. This is similar to what Farah Marfati has prepared, but this was an earlier document, and I was more familiar with this, and it's a shorter one, easier for people to get through. So it goes by a grade listing. In grade 1, they're going to be teaching this. Here's what you might want to say to your child ahead of time. So you were asking about the possible confusion where one thing is taught in school and the parents are saying something else at home. The confusion will be multiplied if parents do not have this discussion with their children, because in that case, they will just be getting vibes. They'll be hearing one thing, they'll be taught one thing very clearly in school, and then at home they're getting this vibe that something really is not right about some of the things that they learn, and they don't know what exactly is not right.
So how should we resolve this vibing conundrum?
Well, by parents having clear and open discussions with their children, they can take one of these guides, go through the things that will be said, some of what you have read out here, and discuss these items based on some of the advice that is given here and others that can be given by Muslim scholars.
Would you ever advise parents who just are not signing on to the new sex ed curriculum to pull their kids out of school entirely and homeschool them?
Homeschooling can be an option for some parents, those who have the educational background and the ability to teach, because not everybody has the ability to teach.
I shouldn't have added that option to the question. Do you think Muslim families who believe in the Quran, who may have problems with the sex ed curriculum, should pull their kids out of public school?
Well, yes and no. If there is a possibility of sending your child to a private Islamic school, to me that's the best thing for Muslim children who, or children of parents who are very serious about getting their children immersed in Islamic education.
And if they can't afford that?
And if they can't afford that, homeschooling may be an option. And if they can't afford that, then the public school is a good option. And in fact, there's no better option in that case than the public school. But that needs to be supplemented in that one cannot just simply leave the public school to educate a Muslim child on Muslim beliefs, just as we cannot expect that the public school today is going to educate a child on Christian beliefs or Jewish beliefs. And so people of religion will naturally set up evening schools, weekend schools, and summer programs, Christmas break programs, Easter break programs, in order to educate the children on the religious principles. So the two have to work hand in hand. But what I recommend for parents to pull their kids out of school and keep them in the park for a day or keep them at home for a week without any planned program, no. And again, I would ask parents to not be frightened by the particular segments of the sexual health and development portions of the curriculum, but look at the entire curriculum. It's a 244-page document, and it's not all about sex. It's sometimes what falls under the sexual health and development section is actually instructions about washing your hands, which is a Muslim thing to do, about brushing your teeth, which is a Muslim thing to do. But it all falls under that broad umbrella, that category. And the rest of the curriculum shows deep insight. It's put together by experts. And in the Islamic faith, we understand that every field has its experts. So if we want a better curriculum than this one, we have to put together our experts to produce a better one and show the Ontario government that we have something better to offer.
Well, that gets to my last question for you then, Omar Subedar, which is, the Ontario government has said they're not backing down. This is it. They believe this is important information for young growing students to have, and they intend to keep it as a part of the curriculum. We know there are many Muslim parents, for example, in Kathleen Wynn's own riding in Thorncliffe Park, who took their kids out of school on that first day of coming back to school this week. How does this resolve itself?
Well, if our Premier doesn't want to listen to Ontarians, then I think the next election will have to speak then. If it goes to that, I mean, I was hoping that our Premier would be open to greater discussion, and I do feel that these are issues that need to be discussed. Yes, we're living in a new age. You have sexting going on. You have cyberbullying going on. These are realities that parents need to be in tune with, and we do have to have these discussions. But for Kathleen, for our Premier to just come and just shove it down our throat with through a process that was already flawed. There was an article that came out just I think yesterday in the Sun or the day before about how the consultation process was not the way it's being projected to be. If our Premier doesn't want to listen to Ontarians, then I think that's a problem. And if she is going to continue to push this, then I think it's the next election we'll have to speak.
You talk about listening to Ontarians. I think she has polls showing that the vast majority of Ontarians actually sign on to this.
Only 42%. 40% say no, 17% are undecided.
Whose poll is that?
I just came across this morning. I didn't cite, I should get the
It's
source.
always dangerous quoting polls because everybody's got a different poll these days. Anyway, I want to thank you two gentlemen for coming in for a very thoughtful discussion about this. Imam Omar Subedar from the Mathuba Institute and Imam Shabbir Ali from the Islamic Information and Dawah Center. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.